Agriculture on the move.
Agricole en mouvement.
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 Good day, everyone, and welcome to the program, Agriculture on the Move. My name is Philip Sidney. I would also like to say a good day to our hard-working fishers out there. I'm hoping that you will be glued to your television today because the program is really for you, and also to the hard-working staff of the Department of Fisheries. Today we are discussing the national policy for the fisheries sector in St. Lucia for 2020-2030. With me to discuss this issue is Ms. Sarita Williams-Peter, who is our Chief Fisheries Officer in the Department of Fisheries, also the Department of Agriculture, Natural Resources and Cooperatives. Welcome to the program, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Sydney.
It's a long time, Sarita.
Yes, it
we have
has
not been here. It's a while. It's about 5 years ago?
Yes, it has been. It's good to be here.
Yeah, well, Sarita, we're discussing this national policy for the fisheries sector, which is a 10-year period, okay? Mm-hmm. But before we get into this, was there a policy prior to this?
Okay, so thanks again. Thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to sharing with our fisher folk more information about the policy. Mm-hmm. There was a policy before, but it was focused mainly on ecosystem. It did not take into account sort of the triple bottom line of sustainable development, which includes the ecological, the social, and the economic considerations in any sector. And so we've tried to move away from only focusing on the resource and the ecosystem, but recognizing that the fisheries sector is an entire value chain, and we need to consider everyone in the value chain, not only fishers. So I'm hoping that not only fishers are glued here today, but processors, all individuals who have a stake or have an interest in the fisheries sector or depend on fish as a livelihood would be geared up and listening to about the policy and know how to move forward.
Tell us about this new policy.
Mm-hmm. So this new policy really focuses on 9 priority areas, and it tries to move, as I said, from the ecological aspect, because that's the base. Mm-hmm. That's you can't move away from it. We must understand that for a fisheries sector to thrive, you must have a healthy ecosystem, you must have healthy fisheries, it must be resilient. And of course, looking at social aspect, people must have good business. If you don't enter a sector or to utilize it for business and not enable you to make a livelihood, to have money on the table, to feed your family, or to have a profit. So these are the aspects we look at. We want to ensure that there's safety, people's welfare are taken into account, and of course the economics of it. What business opportunities can we grow, can we develop, issues of market, etc. So this policy is really trying to transcend the full scope of what a sector is, because we must realize that many sectors are interconnected. Health is interconnected with fisheries, and we saw that during the COVID-19 situation. Yes, it was a health crisis, and it's still a health crisis, but it affects other sectors. And so we must take that into account, and this policy is intended to provide that guidance, that broad scope, where we pull in all the sector partners, not only fisheries people, but all expertise, marketing expertise, economist expertise, because for example, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, yes, Sustainable Development Goal 14 looks at life below water, it's a fisheries issue, but there's issues of decent work, there's issue of gender, there's youth. All of these matters are interconnected, and this policy is intended to bring that focus.
So what's the description you would say of the fisheries sector to put all of this into perspective?
Right now, when we look at, well, in the Department of Fisheries, our focus is both aquaculture and wild-caught fisheries. When you look at wild-caught fisheries, we do recognize that it's still at the production stage. There is still a lot of focus on going out and catching fish, right? So the sector has not developed as well as we hope in terms of the full value chain, getting more individuals in the processing, adding value, other types of roles in the sector. Even fish cleaners have a very important role in the sector and can help develop the sector even more. So this is what we see with the sector in terms of the wild-caught fisheries. When it looks at aquaculture now, we have both freshwater aquaculture and marine aquaculture. In terms of freshwater, we're more or less on land. We focus on land in the earthen ponds. Right now, there's a lot of interest in going into aquaponics as well. Big thing now, growing. And then there's marine aquaculture, where it's also growing. There's a lot more emphasis on the marketing side of things, and so therefore you see the value chain growing and developing, and the production side now is going up because the market demand is higher as well. So this is how we see the two sort of subsectors a little different in terms of the value chain development, but nevertheless the emphasis or the support needed for both is there.
What are your challenges? I'm sure there are lots of challenges that you face in the sector, especially I'm sure when the stakeholders got together in the preparation of this policy. What were the challenges that came to the fore?
Okay, so in the development of this policy, so I must indicate that our previous policy, which was called the Fisheries Plan of 2013 up to 2020, well actually 2022, it's officially expires, but we know that policy is supposed to be kept under review
and
overlap, exactly. So in 2018, when we began the consultation process for this new policy, we try to broaden our scope of stakeholders involved. The previous one, we focus more on the fisher folk, the fishers, those who go out to sea, the boat owners, crew, etc., cooperative members, etc. But then we realized that, hey, if we want a sector to develop the full value chain and to bring in the social and economic considerations, we needed to bring in more sector players. We needed to recognize that we had to bring in gender. We brought the gender people, we brought in social transformation, we brought in Export St. Lucia, all those major players, commerce, all of those industry stakeholders to come in and really understand what the fisheries sector needed and to help integrate that into their portfolios as well. Because fisheries development is not only a role of the Department of Fisheries, it's really a function of all of us, the entire St. Lucia. Fisheries Department supports and is a catalyst for the process, coordinating, etc. But there are certain core functions that we need expertise from other agencies to support. And so this policy is really bringing in that sort of that collaboration and integration to help that go forward.
So what's the real role of government as far as the sector is concerned?
Well, how we see the Department of Fisheries, we see our role in terms of a supportive role. We do support in terms of regulation. Yes, we have to regulate, provide information on harvest rules. So we have to do assessments of the fishery and to inform people of what can be sustainably harvested, what areas where we think that we need to maybe look at new regulations, new rules. So that's why we have the Fisheries Act to guide a lot on that aspect. But there are other things we do. We do training of fisher folk, again, to help propel the sector forward. We provide guidance. We do technology transfer. We connect fishers to other sectors as well. So that, even the basic function where an extension officer would support a fisher in getting his national identification card. These are some of the functions that we do, because all of those efforts are towards developing a holistic sector, not just about catching fish, but an individual who is well prepared, well served moving forward.
Over the years, have you seen with the training that you all provide, young fishers gravitating to the sector?
We are seeing more young fishers, we are, but the challenge that we're seeing now is that they're more or less going into being a crew on a vessel, so they're not opening what we call their own enterprise. There are a few who are doing it, but still I think the challenge is access to financing. That seems to be one of the challenges. With the advent of the cooperatives, that seem to have helped a lot, because when we did our fishery sector census a few years back, we realized a lot of our fisher folk are moving towards the cooperative for financing, which has really helped them get access to finance to buy boats, etc. The other issue is having stability in their crew and commitment. So a boat owner, they would sometimes indicate issues of having stable crew, people who they can trust. So you may purchase a boat, you may have the finances to purchase a boat. Maybe you may not go out to sea all the time, but you entrust your vessel to a captain and crew to manage it for you, and your, the earnings are split. But then there's a issue of trust in the sector, that inherent culture of lack of trust between individuals, the inability to come together, hinders the sector a bit, and the informality of it as well also has to be looked at as to how we can overcome those challenges.
The impact of the policy for the fishers, how really, I mean, I know we've discussed quite a few things relating to that, but let's go down to the fishers themselves, the impact that the policy have on them.
The first thing I would say, the average fisher would say, "Where's the money in my pocket?"
Right.
That's just going to be
Bottom line.
the bottom line. The reality is that the work that we do, it takes time. Change, paradigm shifts take time to realize improvements. So, for example, when the Department of Fisheries introduced the first FAD in St. Lucia, fishers went out, grabbed it, and brought it right back to shore. They didn't understand what it was. They didn't understand the benefit. They thought, well, what is this thing in the water? Now you have fishers say, but we need FADs. Fishers are building their own FADs. People are advocating for FAD because they see the importance. The bottom line is that we're trying to create an environment where fishers can eventually benefit from. So you may not see a direct benefit and more money in your pocket tomorrow, but it is creating an environment where you can now thrive better. You can see other opportunities you can move. And one of the important things that we try to advocate is that it's not only the Department of Fisheries that has a role in the sector, and this is why we did this policy inclusive of all these other agencies, particularly the fisher folk organizations. They have a very critical role in creating business environment for their members. They have a critical role in advocacy and sustainable fisheries management as well. And they tap into quite a bit of funding that we are aware of through international donor organizations to help support their members, to help support fishers. And we encourage that type of collaboration. So we see them as private sector helping private sector as well, which is very important in development. It cannot only be Department of Fisheries doing, but is that collaboration, is creating that policy space or environment to allow people to move in that direction.
Climate change.
Yes, yes, very important issue.
How does that fit in?
Climate change is actually one of the policy priorities within the policy, and it is looking at not climate change and managing disaster risks. It's very critical that these are mainstreamed into what we do, because it is here and it is a real issue. It's a real issue and it has major impacts. So one of the things is looking at in the policy, it's focused on issues of financing of climate change. We actually did a plan specific to climate change adaptation and looking at it from the perspective of different measures that would allow for adaptation to climate change. And we're in the process of implementing that right now. We have a project ongoing called the CC4 Fish Project, which is making certain strides at various landing sites, cooperatives, helping provide inputs to help support that.
I want to come back to climate change, but we'll do for our first break.
Okay, great.
You're watching Agriculture, Fisheries on the Move. We'll be right back.
Accident encore. Mi de bœuf mon là, on go taureau et puis yon belle vache. Des machines croisées et moun blessé. Ah non messieurs et dames, bagay ça là kani pour de bout. Stray animals are endangering human lives and property. Livestock owners, please ensure animals do not stray on roads, highways, and public places. Remember, sections of the Animals Act 2005 states, stray animals will be seized and put in a pound by authorized persons. Owners will be liable to a fine of $5,000 or 2 years imprisonment or both. Save innocent animals. Save human lives and property. A message from the Department of Agriculture.
Welcome back to the program, Agriculture on the Move. With me is the Chief Fisheries Officer, Ms. Sarita Williams-Peter. Before we went to break, we were talking about the impact of climate change, and I'm sure there's so many. It has serious impact on the harvesting by fishers when they go out there. Tell us a little more. What guidance you'll give the fishers with the impact of climate change?
Climate change, we have a changing climate. We know that. We know that there's going to be impact, and there is already impact with respect to the availability of fish within the water, the catchability of fish as well. Even the size of fish gets impacted, the reproductive rates of fish, the habitats are being impacted. And it's not only climate change, but there's inherently the disasters.
Right.
Has an impact. When we had the hurricanes, it causes a lot of sedimentation and it affects reefs. The volcano in St. Vincent, all the ash fallout, all that sediment impacted the reefs as well. I mean, the islands are close, so all of these are interconnected.
Exactly.
And so we recognize that all of that has an impact, both these natural disasters, climate change increases the frequency of natural disasters. So all of these are interconnected. And where we come from, there are a lot you cannot do. There's a lot that is out of our hands, and we are aware that there are a lot of pushes on the international front to help reduce carbon emissions so that we don't have that increase in temperature. But on a national level, where we try to work on is adaptation. We have to adapt. And we have to change our mindsets to try to adapt to the situation. So it includes recognizing that maybe the amount of fish that you used to catch 20 years ago will not be the amount of fish you catch now and the amount of fish you catch in the future.
And that's the impact of climate change.
And that is the impact of climate change. How do we adapt to it? Well, now you need to look at what am I going to be catching and how can I maximize the benefits from that, right? How can I up my marketing strategy? How can I improve my display or quality of the fish so that I get improved market prices for what I have? These are some of the strategies that we look at. And as I said, we have 31 measures, adaptation measures, looking at that. When you look at fisher welfare, you'd have to look at issues of, well, we need to now start thinking of fishers looking at savings, because there may not be that flow of money from fish if you have issues with fish being available in the first place. So now you need to look at backup plans, alternative employment, which is already happening in the sector. We have a lot of fishers who also do other forms of employment. They go into farming, they go into construction, so they're diversifying their income. And so these are some of the things that we have to look at really strategically in terms of moving forward. Even how we build a new fisheries facility has to be reconsidered so that
would that change the method of catching fish? Because of the global warming, and what I'm hearing is that the fish, instead of coming up at a certain level, because of the temperature rise, they go lower. Is there that would change your methodology of fishing?
Certainly, we're looking at issues of migration patterns. The migration routes are expected to change, and they probably are changing right now. which would require fishers sometimes having to go further out at sea. And so that is why our FAD program is so critical to help encourage fish aggregation around the FAD so that they're not having to go so far out to fish, etc. So sometimes we really have to think strategically, look at the situation, work with fishers to figure out the best method. It's one of what we call those wicked problems where there's no one solution to it, but it's really trying to move and see where we can go with it.
Does the policy take into consideration the environment where fish come to spawn, and with development in certain areas, then they will see the degradation of certain areas, and which would affect that aspect? So there's a development coming, of course, we know down in V4, and then we know there is an area where the fish they're coming into the mangroves. What happens? I mean, does the policy look at that too?
Yes, the policy looks at that as well, because, and I'm happy you brought that up, because that is the baseline for the sector.
Right.
Having a healthy resource base is going to be what's important for stimulating the full value chain.
Right.
So when you look at issues of land-based development, that has a major impact on fishers' livelihoods. I'll bring a practical example for you. Conch, queen conch.
Right.
It is very valuable species, but the animal does not have suitable habitat, particularly when the habitat has a lot of sediment.
Right.
So if you have a lot of sediment outfall, the seafloor gets a lot of sediment, you're losing habitat that is critical for queen conch. And so therefore the fishers now either has to go further out,
yes.
to
Which puts a little more stress.
put more strain on them, more resources, more tanks to dive, and you have less and less habitat, just as birds.
Yes.
If you cut down the forest, less and less habitat,
Correct.
less and less birds.
Yeah,
It's the same principle. So land-based sources of pollution, what we do on land has a major impact in terms of what happens in the sea, and can equate to loss of finances and money and opportunities for our fisher folk and everyone else within the value chain. And so how we develop is very important. Doing the environmental impact assessments is very important, and following the mitigation measures that have been outlined is very critical as well. Development can happen with conservation. The agendas can coincide, but we have to do it in a sustainable way. There will be things that you can do, and there are things that you need to reconsider because the impact may be just too great, and then you have to reconsider.
Who create that balance there?
And that balance is important. And then this is where, again, the other policy priority is stakeholder engagement and involvement in decision making.
Right.
So our fisher folk need to be able to advocate and speak on those issues and to be part of that decision making.
Because they're the ones being affected.
They're the ones going to be affected. And so it's important that that balance is not only the Department of Fisheries advocating for, but it comes from the stakeholders as well. And that is very critical.
The CMOS farmers, are they part and parcel? The policy looks at them also?
Definitely looks at them.
Because that is critical, eh?
Yes.
And I'm saying so in the sense that I have been on 1 or 2 trips where there are issues with them and the sea bathers and also fishers. So what's the situation?
The situation is St. Lucia has a very small coastline. You know, it's funny because when you look at St. Lucia, compared to our exclusive economic zone, our fishery waters, it's 1 to 20, almost over 20. So that the sea is almost 20 times more than the land in terms of space. And so we have a lot of space in terms of management to do. But funny enough, the coastline is even smaller. The amount of coastline we have is not a lot, and a lot of appropriate areas for sea moss culture is not a lot either. And so therefore it creates this conflict between other activities that take place in the coastline. We are working towards some solutions to that issue. I know we have engaged Crown Lands and other agencies with certain legal authorities in that matter to help the situation. And I know it's ongoing, and the CMOS farmers have also organized themselves as well to help advocate for certain things that they want. So this striking that balance in such a small space is so critical. And sometimes some tough decisions have to be made as well. Yeah.
Does the policy look at, for example, fish stock and its harvesting, and looking at harvesting at a sustainable level?
Yes. So the policy looks at that because the Department of Fisheries doesn't sit in isolation. Nationally doesn't sit in isolation. We work very closely with regional and international organizations, because fish, particularly when you look at migratory species like the dolphin fish and wahoo, marlin, all of these are migratory species. And so it's shared between many countries, and international law requires that these countries with said species collaborate and come up with regulations together. And only through that togetherness can we see results. And so this policy looks at bringing that information both from the international front to the national level, and what is happening at the national level to that international arena, so that there's a balance. And so fish stock management, data collection are very critical aspects. The fishers know that we have data collectors at the various landing sites, which collect information from them on fish catch. I know sometimes when they don't have fish caught, they probably get very upset to somebody's come and ask them about what was caught, but it's important to engage in that process.
I'm wondering whether, I've not read the policy in its entirety, but I'm wondering whether it has enough teeth to bite. Say, for example, when you have some of your species, you know, that is in season, and fishers actually go in and they actually harvest those species that are not supposed to be harvested off season. What I mean, I'm not hearing certain persons are being prosecuted, you know. So with this 10-year fisheries policy, does it give enough teeth to bite to actually, you know, hold people responsible for not going thus far?
The policy itself won't do that. It is the legislation that would do that.
Right.
But we will interact, and what we have been doing is interacting with the enforcement to help support that. Illegal fishing affects all fishers. It brings an unfair balance to the process, and it's really a situation we need to move away from. And so this policy will create more education and try to help steer people away from the illegal fishing. But ultimately, the legislation, enhancement of the legislation, promoting greater resources to enforce will help support that.
Okay. I notice you have 9 areas of you're focusing the policy. I'm wondering, I think you touched on many of them, a few of them already, but moving forward, where do you see after 10 years, 2020 to 2030, what happens after that?
We take during the process.
Is there a monitoring and evaluation of the policy to see whether you have achieved, or is it done every year?
Yes. So the intention is that we will continue to monitor the policy, how it's been implemented, what has been achieved, and then focus on where the challenges are, where the gaps are, where the successes are, and keep revising the policy, keep seeing how we can improve. Because we must monitor. We must monitor, see how we're achieving, see how we're growing. And each of these 9 policy areas, and I'm sure we can go through each of them in detail.
Yes.
Right, but the intention is that each of them will be looked at, look at the strategies articulated under them, and see where we can tick and say, yes, we've achieved it, what's missing, and in 2030 reevaluate the landscape. And then come back. And then come back and develop a new policy direction.
Well, we have reached the end of the program. I know you didn't realize it was so short. I want to thank you again for coming, Sarita, and I'm wishing you success on monitoring this policy, of course, and I hope the fishers will benefit from this. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You've been watching Agriculture on the Move, of course, Fisheries on the Move. Thank you for viewing. The fishers, I'm hoping that you will continue to ask questions. Go to your extension officer, come to the head office, and if you do not understand everything that was discussed here, I'm sure they will give you a hearing. Thank you again. I'm Philip Sidney. Goodbye.
Agriculture on the move.
Agricole mouvement.
Agriculture on the move.
Agricole en mouvement.
Agriculture on the move.
Agricole en mouvement.
Agriculture on the move.
Agricole en mouvement.